The line spread through the small town like a shadow passing over sunlight. I will harm you through this mirror, and that widow and her boy will belong to me. No one knew where it started. Some said they heard it at the market. Others said it came from a man standing near the old pawn shop. But everyone remembered how quiet the air had been right after. It wasn't only the words that frightened them. It was the way they were spoken slowly, almost as if the speaker was making a promise instead of a threat. The town itself was small, quiet, and surrounded by hills. People knew one another by name, and news traveled faster than the wind. It didn't take long before every shopkeeper, every teacher, and even the children in the square were whispering about the same strange sentence. Some laughed it off, calling it a foolish story made up to pass time, but others felt uneasy, as if a storm was waiting to break. At the center of the story was a woman named Maria, a widow who lived at the edge of town. She had lost her husband a year before in an accident at the mill. Since then, she had lived alone with her young son, Thomas, in a small white house with green windows and a garden that she tended every morning. Maria was quiet but kind, the sort of person who helped others without asking for anything back. Her son, Thomas, was a cheerful boy of about 8, curious and talkative. He loved to collect pebbles and chase butterflies. People liked him because he reminded them of better times, the kind of child who could make even a tired shopkeeper smile. But peace doesn't always last long in small towns. The man behind the strange words was Rico, a former tradesman. Years ago, he had been known as a talented carpenter, the kind of man who could build anything from a wooden chair to an entire roof frame. He had a wife once and a home that smelled of pine wood and tea. But his life had taken a difficult turn. His business failed, his family left, and the warmth in his eyes slowly disappeared. Some said his losses had made him bitter, while others believed he had simply lost hope. He had returned to town months ago, quiet at first, renting a small room above the tailor's shop. People noticed how he looked at things for too long, how his hands shook when he held a cup. Then one afternoon he appeared at the market and said those unforgettable words about the mirror, the widow and her boy. It was strange how one sentence could change the air around people. From that day on, Maria felt eyes on her wherever she went. Sometimes when she walked to the bakery early in the morning, she would see a shadow move behind her or catch a glimpse of someone standing too still near the fountain. At first she told herself it was only her imagination, but Thomas once said, "Mama, that man with the gray coat was watching our gate again." That night, Maria could not sleep. She sat by the window holding her cup of tea and watched the stars. The world outside her window looked calm, too calm maybe, and the silence pressed against the glass. A few days later, something odd happened at the old pawn shop. It was run by Mr. Lobo, an elderly man with round glasses and a slow, patient voice. He was polishing an antique mirror when Rico walked in. The mirror was large, framed with gold paint that had faded into bronze, and its glass caught the light like still water. Mr. Lobo said later that Rico had stared into it for several minutes without speaking, as if the mirror were talking back to him. When the old man finally asked if he wanted to buy it, Rico only smiled and said, "Not yet." The story of the mirror spread quickly. Some said it was cursed. Others said it reflected what people feared the most. No one knew how much of it was true, but the more people talked, the more nervous they became. For Maria, life began to change in quiet, invisible ways. Her friends grew careful with their words when they visited her. Some stopped coming altogether. Even the grocer, who used to joke with her every morning, now spoke in whispers and avoided meeting her eyes. The town wasn't cruel, it was just afraid. Still, Maria tried to live as she always had. She made Thomas breakfast, sent him to school, and kept her garden tidy. She told herself that gossip couldn't hurt her, that the world was still good. But sometimes she noticed small signs that something was wrong. A folded note left under her door with no name. A single white feather on her window ledge. A strange tapping sound late at night. Thomas noticed her worry but didn't understand it. One evening he asked, "Mama, why are people scared of mirrors now?" She smiled and told him it was only an old story. Nothing to fear. But inside she wasn't sure. Weeks passed and the feeling of unease grew. Rico was often seen wandering near the pawn shop or the church, talking quietly to himself. He never spoke to Maria directly, but his presence was heavy, like a storm cloud that never burst. When townspeople asked him about his strange sentence, he would shrug and say, "You'll see. The mirror shows everything." One Sunday morning, the local pastor mentioned the situation during his sermon. He didn't name anyone, but everyone understood who he was talking about. "Fear grows when people keep secrets," he said. "We must protect one another, not hide from one another." The words gave people comfort for a while, but fear is stubborn. It doesn't vanish easily. That evening, Maria visited the pawn shop. She wanted to see the mirror for herself. Mr. Lobo showed it to her, warning her not to believe the rumors. But when she looked into the glass, she felt something unsettling. Not because of what she saw, but because of what she imagined. In her reflection, she saw herself standing alone, holding Thomas's hand tightly. Behind her, the light in the shop flickered, and for a second, she thought she saw another face in the glass. It vanished when she blinked. She left quickly, her heart beating fast. After that night, she decided to be careful. She began locking her doors early, checking the windows twice, and walking Thomas to school every morning. She didn't want to live in fear, but she also couldn't ignore her instincts. The town began to split into two kinds of people: those who thought Rico was harmless, and those who believed his words meant something darker. Some people said he was just lonely and misunderstood, while others said loneliness can twist a person's mind. One rainy afternoon, a few villagers saw him standing outside Maria's gate, just staring at her house. He didn't move or speak, and when they called out to him, he turned away silently and disappeared into the fog. That night, Maria found another small note under her door. It had no words this time, only a tiny drawing of a mirror. That was when she went to the local constable. He listened politely but said there wasn't much he could do. "He hasn't broken any law," the constable said, "but I'll keep an eye on things." His voice was calm, but Maria could tell he didn't fully believe her. Days turned into weeks. The atmosphere in town grew heavy, filled with whispers and uncertain looks. People spoke about the mirror as if it were alive, as if it could see them when they passed by the pawnshop window. Mr. Lobo finally covered it with a dark cloth, saying it was better that way. But the unease didn't end. Rico still walked through the streets slow and quiet, like someone waiting for something only he understood. Maria watched him from a distance, never sure what he would do next. Each time their paths crossed, he gave a half-smile that sent a chill through her. Yet, even in fear, Maria found moments of strength. She began to teach Thomas how to be brave, not by fighting but by standing firm. She told him stories at night about people who faced difficulties and still chose kindness. Courage, she said, is not loud. Sometimes it's just the decision to keep living your life. The people of the town slowly began to notice her quiet strength. The grocer started greeting her again. The teacher walked Thomas home once or twice, and even the constable began to check her street more often. A sense of community, fragile but real, began to form around her. But everyone still knew something was coming. The air before a storm feels a certain way, still, electric, expectant. The same feeling hung over the town now. The mirror in the pawn shop stayed covered, but some swore they still saw movement beneath the cloth at night. Others said Rico was spending more time near the hills, carrying something wrapped in paper. No one could say what would happen next, but everyone understood that this strange story was far from over. And in her small white house, Maria looked at her sleeping son, brushed a hand over his hair, and whispered a prayer, not for miracles but for safety, and for the strength to face whatever the next day would bring. The days that followed were filled with uneasy calm. The town carried on with its daily routines, but everyone moved a little slower, spoke a little softer, and looked over their shoulders a little more often. It felt like the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Maria tried to live as normally as she could. She didn't want Thomas to feel afraid. Every morning she walked him to school, waved goodbye at the gate, and smiled as if everything was fine. Then, once she was sure he was safely inside, she would let the smile fade and take a deep breath before walking home. The world around her looked the same. The bakery still smelled of bread, the bell tower still rang at noon, but underneath, everything felt different. One afternoon, the constable stopped by her house. His name was Mr. Darrow, a quiet man who had worked in the town for many years. "I've been watching the streets," he said kindly. "Rico hasn't done anything wrong, but I can tell people are worried. I'll make sure you're safe." Maria thanked him, though she could see in his eyes that even he didn't quite know what to believe. That night, the wind began to howl around the house. The old trees near the fence swayed, their branches scratching softly against the windows. Maria couldn't sleep. She walked into Tomas's room and found him awake too, holding his blanket tightly. "Mama," he whispered, "I dreamed about the mirror." "What did you see?" she asked gently. He hesitated. "It showed a light, and then someone covering it, but when I looked closer, the light came back again." Maria smiled and brushed his hair back. "That's a good dream," she said. "It means no darkness lasts forever." The next morning, she decided she would no longer let fear control her days. She went to the market, greeted her neighbors, and bought flowers for her garden. People were surprised to see her looking calm, and something in her courage seemed to give them courage too. Soon the old market buzz returned, cautious, but hopeful. Still, the mystery of the mirror lingered. Mr. Lobo, the pawnshop owner, had covered it with a heavy cloth weeks ago, but strange things kept happening. Some customers said they heard soft sounds coming from behind the curtain, like faint whispers or a hum. Others said the light in the shop bent oddly whenever they passed by it. Mr. Lobo, being a sensible man, told everyone not to imagine things, yet even he began to feel uneasy in his own shop. One sunny afternoon, Maria gathered her courage and went to see him again. "Mr. Lobo," she said, "I think it's time we know the truth about that mirror. Maybe if we face it, people will stop being afraid." The old man looked at her thoughtfully, then nodded. "All right," he said, "but you won't face it alone." He called 2 other townspeople, the schoolteacher, Miss Alma, and the constable, Mr. Darrow, and together they uncovered the mirror. Dust rose in the air, sparkling like mist. For a moment the glass seemed ordinary, only reflecting their faces, but then something subtle shifted. The mirror didn't show the shop as it was. It showed the street outside, bright and still. They could see people walking, though no one was near the window. Mr. Darrow frowned. "It's like a window," he murmured. Maria stepped closer. "Maybe it's showing what we fear or what we need to see," she said quietly. Her reflection looked calm, but her heart was beating fast. That evening, word spread quickly that Maria had stood before the mirror without fear. People began to talk about her differently. No longer was she the helpless widow everyone pitied. Now, she was the brave woman who dared to face the mystery. Meanwhile, Rico grew restless. Some said he had been seen wandering near the hills. Others said he was leaving town. A few people even thought he had already gone. But Maria sensed he was still around. She didn't feel anger toward him anymore, only a strange, heavy sadness. Sometimes she thought that maybe his words about the mirror had been less a threat and more a cry for attention from someone who had lost his way. One afternoon, while walking home from the market, Maria noticed someone sitting on a bench near the old fountain. It was Rico. He looked thinner, older, and tired. When he saw her, he didn't stand up. He simply said, "I didn't mean to scare you." Maria didn't know what to say. The silence between them stretched long, filled with the sound of water trickling from the fountain. Finally, she said, "Words can hurt even if we don't mean them to, but fear can be healed." Rico looked down at his hands. "That mirror! I thought it could show people their truth. I was wrong. It only showed me how lost I am." Maria nodded slowly. "Maybe it showed you that because you needed to see it." After a pause, Rico stood. "I'll leave tomorrow," he said softly. "I think the town will breathe easier without me." Maria didn't stop him. She only wished him peace, and when he walked away, she felt a strange sense of closure. Not joy, but relief, like a door gently closing behind her. That evening, as the sun set over the town, Maria stood in her garden. The sky was painted in shades of gold and rose, and the air smelled of damp earth and fresh leaves. Tomas played nearby, his laughter light and unafraid. For the first time in many weeks, she felt the simple comfort of safety. But one last surprise waited. A week later, Mr. Lobo visited Maria's house. He carried a small box and placed it on her table. "This was behind the mirror," he said. "I found it when I was cleaning the shop. I think it belongs to you." Maria opened the box carefully. Inside was a photograph, faded but still clear enough to see. It was of her late husband standing next to a younger Rico. They were both smiling, holding the frame of a mirror they had built together. Maria stared at it in disbelief. "They knew each other," she whispered. Mr. Lobo nodded. "It seems your husband and Rico once worked together. Maybe the mirror was meant to be a gift, or maybe a reminder. It explains why he felt drawn to you, though in a very confused way." That night, Maria placed the photograph on her shelf beside a candle. She didn't know exactly what the mirror had been, an ordinary object, a symbol, or something more mysterious. But she understood one thing: sometimes people's pain turns into strange stories that ripple through others' lives, and sometimes understanding is the only way to end fear. Over the next few weeks, the town slowly returned to its rhythm, the market filled with laughter again. Children ran through the square without glancing behind them. Even the church bells sounded brighter, as if the air had cleared of a long-held tension. Maria kept living simply. She worked in her garden, helped her neighbors, and taught Thomas small lessons about kindness and courage. Whenever he grew scared of something, she would remind him, "The mirror doesn't decide who you are. You do." One evening near the end of summer, she and Thomas walked past the pawn shop. The mirror was still there, uncovered now, shining softly in the warm light. People no longer feared it. Instead, they saw it as a part of their town's history, a strange story that had brought them all closer. Maria looked at her reflection for a long moment. She saw not fear, but peace. The face that looked back at her was still her own, but stronger, wiser, and calm. Thomas tugged at her hand. "Mama, do you think the mirror is magic?" She smiled. "Maybe it is in a small way. But the real magic is when people stop being afraid and start helping one another." That night, as the stars came out, Maria sat by the window again. The same window where she once sat, trembling. Now she looked out with quiet gratitude. The garden shimmered softly under moonlight, and she could hear Thomas breathing peacefully in the next room. She thought about everything that had happened: the fear, the whispers, the mirror, the man who had lost his way, and realized that even the darkest moments had taught her something important. They had shown her how strong she truly was, and how even small acts of courage could change the course of many lives. And so, the story that had begun with fear ended with understanding. The townspeople never forgot it. They spoke about it for years, not as a tale of danger, but as a reminder that light always finds a way through. And whenever someone new came to the town and asked about the old mirror in the pawn shop, the locals would smile and say, "That mirror once showed us who we really are." As for Maria and Thomas, they continued their lives surrounded by kindness and quiet hope. The garden bloomed brighter than before, and every morning, when Maria looked into her own small mirror, she no longer saw worry in her reflection, only peace, and the calm strength of a woman who had faced fear and turned it into light.